the Luminous Possibilities Podcast. We offer a diversity of perspectives from many fields of medicine, esoteric and ancient wisdom, and subtle energy, arts, and sciences. Find deeply fulfilling pathways for co-creating yourself, life, and human communities around you. Find inspiring attunements to your own optimal living roadmap, true authentic self, and the most radiant frequency for living life to the fullest. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Luminous Possibilities podcast. I'm Keenan White, your host, and this is Lyndsie Coon, our guest today.
Hi, Keenan.
How are we doing today, Lyndsie?
I'm doing great.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. It's going to be fun talking about your background. You've got some amazing offerings to the world, and I look forward to exploring today.
Thanks. Me too.
Yeah. So to kind of introduce you to the community, where are you coming from? You're from Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that you've been primarily working with is EFT tapping, which is an emotional freedom technique.
Right.
Okay. So yeah, just tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're coming from, and kind of what led you here to this community and to your profession.
Yeah, sure. Well, I can kind of just explain how I got into EFT. It's an interesting story. I was a rock climber for a while and had a rock climbing accident. So that was about 8 or 9 years ago. And I fell 30 feet and shattered the lower half of my body. And I needed something to cope with it. I needed something that could help me deal with stress and anxiety. Where before I used exercise, I used my physical body to work out stress, and being in crutches and a cane, I didn't have that anymore. But I did have this one technique I learned called emotional freedom techniques, and it's this really weird modality that I had randomly discovered online that uses the meridian points and psychology together. And I was really interested in both of those, in energy and the way our mind works. And so I latched onto it, but didn't use it until the accident, where I realized I had this. So I used tapping to deal with the emotional stress of being injured. And then I also, at the same time in my life, was going through a period of how can I serve humanity? How can I take this experience and help people who are also suffering, who are also in emotional pain from trauma and from other things in their life? And so a coach I was working with helped me come to see that I could just start a group supporting people like me. And I started it because I was also looking for support myself, being an accident survivor, and there was nothing in the community. So I thought, well, I'll just do it. And I don't want to sit around and talk about my problem, my pain. I don't like that. I want to actually, I'm a doer. I want to do something about it. I want to take action.
Yeah.
So I'll teach them this technique that I have in my book, in my tool belt, this emotional freedom techniques. So I started a support group, and the support group kind of just morphed into a tapping group. So me teaching tapping and people coming to tap. And I did that for a couple years just as a way to serve and to also help my own healing process. And then I decided to go get certified, and I started doing workshops for the core group of people and started doing clients. So
beautiful. Wow.
yeah.
It's a big story, coming from that amount of pain and falling 30 feet. That's a heck of a distance. And falling into this technique online, it's kind of funny how things actually fall into our lap, and these different modalities show up for us at the right time.
Yeah. Well, and there was a summit that was being done, these online, it's like 7-day online summits and I felt this total draw to it. I didn't know why. I'd never heard of anything like it, but I listened all 7 days, and I didn't know what it was going to be for. And then it wasn't until probably like 3 years later that I actually had the accident and I used it. But
I'm sure there was other modalities and things going on at the summit, but for some
no, it was
reason,
all EFT.
it was all EFT.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, for anyone interested and wants more information, a great way to get started is to look up the EFT Summit with Nick Ortner, and he brings in experts. He's brought in like Jack Canfield and Wayne Dyer and people to speak about these topics. Then these people are also into EFT. So a lot of these kind of self-help professionals, you don't realize they also love EFT, and they'll bring it into their modalities. So
right. So this is, go ahead.
I was gonna say, you can learn about emotional freedom techniques and just the very basics of it and how to do it if you go to their website, which is thetappingsolution.com. That's how I
Awesome.
Yeah, that's how I
Yeah, thanks for sharing that researching.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's nice to see that there's a lot of other well-known and renowned professionals that support EFT, and they're integrating that into their practice
so cool
too.
So many people, when you get into it, you realize, well, this is a lot bigger and spreading a lot more than you would have thought.
Totally. And I mean, I was curious, and I think like a human being is with many modalities, a little skeptical, like, okay, we're going to tap and then we're going to sort of work through something. But I mean, my experience with you having a couple sessions has been profound.
Cool.
So we'll get into sharing that a little bit.
Okay.
I do want to ask you, when you say tapping, like, what does that mean to you? Because there's this, okay, we're tapping and it's EFT. And so, but it's so much more than that. I mean, when I think about EFT, to me, what stands out is emotional freedom.
Yeah.
And who wouldn't want that? I mean, like if you can feel emotionally free and you're not feeling stuck, stagnant, anxious, whatever it is, then hey, I'm in.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because it is way more than just getting into the body and releasing some stuck energy, which that is, very basic level. That's what we're doing. Yet the effects and the meaning that it can have on one's life is way beyond just like releasing some energy, because it's on an emotional level. And as we all know, our emotions dictate our life and our future and our feelings about ourselves and the world. So if we can look at how to be present with our emotions, how to really come from a witnessing perspective of being able to experience them from that level, that's what EFT means to me. It means the ability to separate myself from my emotions, and so that I can realize that I'm not, even though I'm having an emotional experience, I'm not my emotions.
Right.
And so it's incorporating all of our experiences, all of our emotions into our experience as a human and making it okay. So I think at the basis, like the core of what it means to me is self-acceptance and self-love.
Nice. Yeah. And it's interesting to, when I think about emotions, I think about the documentary E-Motion.
Yeah.
And they've got, like Joe Dispenza's on there and some others, and they just kind of talk about emotions and how they play an impact on our life in pretty much every form. And the way I've kind of understood emotions and the word emotion is that it sort of takes this sociocultural context. And there's a feeling that we have in our system and in our body that we experience based on, in some experience that we're having. And then there's what the mind does with the feeling. And then if it wasn't a good feeling, or if it, was something bad that we label as bad in the mind, and then it was just really, some fear that we had, or maybe it was some sadness that the mind says, well, I don't want to look at that again. And then this emotion takes on this sort of complex in which the feelings and the sensations get sort of locked and stored in the body. And from my experience, I mean, with you, just seeing how you start to uncover that sensation and you start to realize, like, wow, there's this feeling that's a very simple feeling that I had, and it's associated with the past. And maybe it's a traumatic experience, like falling off 30 feet, or for me, one of the ones we worked through was being, a 6-year-old kid and just driving away in the van with my dad, and, him being rageful and my mom being upset, and sister was crying, and there was all this stuff that was sort of locked in my system.
Yeah.
But to actually go back and to experience that, it's like you said, you bring in that observer, the witness You know,
Yeah.
I think about it as sort of like um, the enlightened observer,
Mm-hmm.
the one that's sort of, um, you're sort of accessing that witness observer consciousness that's beyond the body and the mind,
Yeah.
and that can just see what's happening and then be with the experience without necessarily having to have a first person experience of it, but then allow things to move. And I mean, I felt energy moving up my spine and releasing, and just, I mean, it felt very real. And of course, we ended up digging out, and brought me to tears at some point. And it
Mm-hmm.
was like, whoa, I had no idea that was
That,
all sitting in there. And
yeah.
so I guess I'll just leave my comment right now with the fact that it seems like the subconscious is this huge part of what you're tapping into.
Huge. Yeah. I mean, I really is what we're tapping into. Because, our conscious mind is responsible for locking in those beliefs, saying like, well, I must not have anything important to say. That's what your 6-year-old took away.
Right.
And that's, so we process the emotions, the fear, the rejection that he felt. And we, from a witnessing, accepting aspect, then we're able to undo that belief.
Mm-hmm.
So, a lot of why we lock it in is because we think this shouldn't be happening. I've done something wrong. And so we can undo that by processing the experience. And what we did, during our session was go back
Mm-hmm.
and to let that little boy know you're safe, you didn't do anything wrong, and you're okay. So it's really kind of like, I think of it as unwinding the trauma. When we're going through something traumatic and we have all of this flood of emotion at once, and we make a limiting belief in a split second, we really don't have control over that.
Mm-hmm.
It just happens. That's our human nature. And this is, why we're here is so, we form these beliefs, and then we get the privilege of bringing a presence back into it, that, the enlightened presence back into ourself, and deciding who we are. This is kind of like EFT can facilitates that, facilitates the unwinding.
Yeah, I love that. Bringing in
Mm-hmm.
some existential stuff into this.
Yes,
Yeah, why we're
always.
here. Yeah. So many ways of seeing that. But yeah, I mean, I think to me, we really come here to have a feeling experience. And
Mm-hmm.
if we're, not tapping into some of the feelings that we've had in the past, so to speak, because to me, it's all sort of non-linear, and the past is present with us.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this little boy, for me, it was a 6-year-old self. And that's an energetic signature that's with me all the time.
Yeah.
And how I relate to him is really how I'm relating to myself.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can say that before we worked on that, I mean, it was funny how we ended up getting to that particular memory, because it
Mm-hmm.
didn't start there.
Mm-hmm.
And we can talk about that, but I'll say that yeah, I mean, getting to that little boy, and then being like, whoa, shit, this is like an intelligent part of me. It was essentially a part of my strength, and a part of um, this playful, curious side of me that I kind of pushed and shut away based on this experience. And then to integrate that back into my system, and to feel more full and like whole and more fully myself. I mean, it's powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. Really big. Because that
Yeah,
one instance, that meaning making that you took from it, then influences all different aspects of your life. You and I started talking, it was about public speaking and a little bit of anxiety that you got beforehand.
sure.
And you
Here
and
we are.
yeah, here we are. And you said one thing to me that a lot of my clients have said, which is, well, I don't know if this memory has anything to do with it, but there's this one time when I was 6, or it's this one time when I was however old, this thing happened, and it kind of reminds me of that. And for those listening, I just want people to know that is really how it's connected. It's not really what we think it is. We think that this fear has to do with we know what people might think, and that could be, it's a very valid fear, and you can use EFT to calm that fear. But if you can go deeper, if you can go more into where it started, where that feeling may have reminded you of a past experience, of a specific memory, then that's where the gold lies. That's what, and I explained this to you earlier, Keenan, are the table legs, this metaphor that we use in
It's a nice
EFT.
one.
Yeah. So the issue, let's say public speaking, is the tabletop, and what holds up the table, what keeps it up, are the table legs, and the table legs represent specific memories. So until you resolve these imprints, these specific memories, these things that happened to you, um, in your past, and especially the first 7 years of your life, address those with EFT, and you unwind the imprint, then the whole tabletop or the whole table can then collapse. Then you're looking at issues like poor self-esteem, or issues with public speaking, or things that seem very global, that those can then fall away.
Yeah, and it seems to me like that collapsing metaphor works well in terms of holding sort of like this emotionally charged energy and then allowing that to collapse into neutrality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love how, I mean, what you're pointing to is something that is important in any, practice in medicine or health, is getting to the root of something and not really working symptomatically. Because we could have used an experience where, I went into some other moment where I may have been public speaking and had some anxiety, but we were like seeing how, because, and part of me knows that it's not really that. So what is bringing that energy into an experience like public speaking? And then, because it's a moment where you're holding on to something. And we basically, I mean, part of me knew that it was sort of traced back to that little kid moment where, okay, we're dealing with speech, we're dealing with being received perhaps in our message.
Right. Right.
And so to go back and kind of sort of trace to see the connection to, what's the theme at the moment, really looking at the body and the sensation that you're having at a point that you're charged. And to me, triggered, charged, that's just a way of seeing sort of some activity in the body sensationally that's going on, some feeling that's prominent.
Exactly.
That maybe it's a faster heartbeat, maybe it's your sweating, maybe it's and that to me is like there's something being held there. Do you see that as a gateway
Definitely.
into? Yeah.
Yeah. EFT is a mind body connective tool. And so if you have a memory where you can feel what it felt like and your body responds to that memory, then that's definitely something to look at. And even if it just comes up in your awareness when you're thinking about a certain issue. So for your example, public speaking, and you get a flash of this memory, I mean, your mind might say, oh, that's not related, don't worry about that. But your subconscious is telling you this. It's bringing this up for a reason. So anything that you can clearly see in your mind's eye and remember and feel, it may not seem related, but look at it. And it can be tempting to say that doesn't matter anymore, that was long ago, I'm over it, I should be fine by now. Let that be your activity of your mind that's trying to keep you safe, and just look at your willingness to dive into it, because especially using a modality like EFT, it takes the edge off to where you're not reliving the trauma, but you're calming your system down as you're doing the tapping and allowing you to still experience and release it at the same time.
Yeah, it's really nice. You bring a lot of clarity to connecting the consciousness to the subconscious to me, because, and I was laughing because, it was that moment where I was like, oh, well, maybe that's not. And then, so it's part of me at this moment, recognizing how skilled you can be. I mean, even just your experience being with clients and noticing how to connect with that, it takes sort of this refined sense and a refined eye, and you definitely seem to carry that to be able to notice the small moments where someone, I mean, everything kind of matters. It's sort of this interplay of the minutia of the body language and then what's being said, and then does that match, and is there a coincidence with the two, and is there an incongruency, and sort of finding that
Sure.
the leverage between mind, body. Yeah.
That's a definite advantage of having a practitioner with you and guide you through it, because it's really hard for us to see, the extent of our own wounding, because we're trained and our minds are trained not to. You don't really want to fully see or experience it because it was painful. It makes sense. So, having a guide to get you to those little spaces, or use the technique that you and I use, which was very specific for traumatic memories. It's the tell the story technique within EFT, slows it down so that you go through the moment, and all those emotions that can just pile in at once in one moment, we kind of we unwind it, or we spread it out, so that, like you experienced, there's the fear, there's the rejection, there's the anger. I mean, like all in one.
All the stuff that I don't want to feel.
All the stuff you want to
don't want to go back.
And you've been really good at not feeling it. Like,
right. Totally.
It's nothing to say, oh man, I can't believe I did that to myself. No, that is a normal human. All those emotions at once is a normal human
It's actually
reaction.
Part of the body's intelligence. I think one of the interesting things that clicked for me at one point was, when we experience a trauma, we adapt in some way and develop a pattern that's based on our trauma. And we look back and we're like, how, and then we clear it. And then, maybe you have an EFT session, or you have some kind of coaching session that integrates a part of that in a new way, where you're like, okay, I'm not doing that pattern anymore. I'm moving on. And then there's been times where that's happened to me, and I've looked back and been like, why was I doing that? But there's someone that mentioned to me at one point, it's actually the body's intelligence, your intelligence to adapt to a situation and protect yourself.
Yeah.
And to know that, I think gives, it's given myself, and I think it's given other clients of mine some grace, in the situation of looking and being like, wow, that adaptation that you had that seems limiting was actually highly intelligent.
Yeah, right. And the fact that you're repeating it is not a weakness, but actually, like you were saying, an adaptive quality. Because of course you don't want to experience that trauma again, and you're going to do everything you can not to. And so you're like, yourself, your 6-year-old self is brilliant to say, well, I'm never going to try that again or anything like it, because that was really painful. So it's the part of the healing process to take yourself back and to say, I'm choosing something else. I haven't done anything wrong.
And I think it's really amazing to see, because part of me was like, okay, well, I'm going to feel some of the feelings I don't really want to feel, and that's going to be what it is, right? But then there is some sort of a higher integration of self. And I mean, to pull in a part of me that is young, it brings more of my older self into more like presence.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Or more of my maturity, because I'm embracing all parts of myself. If I'm pushing away the little kid in me, then it's harder, that little kid's going to come out and be like, hey, and bring that energy into some situations to basically, to me, like, be loved, like to have awareness, a loving awareness, brought to that, right, to that energy, to that self.
Yeah. Cause you're more integrated now. The part of you that's 6 years old, that loves to play, loves to express, loves to be himself, can come out. And if we're all stuffy adults, it gets really boring.
It gets weird too.
It gets weird. It's like, you want to let that innocence shine, the part of you that you shut down. I think of it as more of an integrative technique than a releasing technique. EFT is spoken a lot of as a releasing technique. Really what we're doing is we're pulling those parts of ourselves that we shut off or shut down or discarded or outcast back into our self, back into being able to be whole because we embrace it.
I love that distinction. Yeah, because you clear space, and then something is kind of, it's sort of like, oh, I have this space now in my system. And when I say system, I mean just kind of my energy, my emotional body. And I feel like sometimes we want to go, like the body almost kind of wants to revert back, snap back to where it was before because it's a new space. Is there anything that you say is sort of like that you recommend or you've thought about as sort of like an aftercare to this kind of session with, with creating that new space? Because it feels like, it wants to be filled. And I mean, I guess I can kind of speak a little bit to the end of our session to where I feel like you really closed the container skillfully to where we both sense that that something was complete. Like we're not just, you're not going to leave me in a place where like, okay, cool, you release something. There is this integration, which is sort of pulling back in that part of self, the kid in my situation. And then that's that wholeness. It's like you're feeling more full.
Yeah. And realizing that you just brought in a new level of awareness of yourself and that part of yourself who was 6 years old. And what we did at the end of the session, I think anyone can do, and ask that part of yourself, what else do you need? We just helped him with a memory. And so he's had a level of healing, and then there's going to be more.
Never early over, is it?
Yeah. So, what does he need from you moving forward? What does that part of ourself that may be a little raw, maybe still a little vulnerable, there may be other aspects of healing that part of yourself need from you, and how can you show up for that part of yourself? There's a part of me, for example, that experienced the trauma of the fall, that the more I become aware of her, of the imprint that the trauma made, I can be aware of the moments that I get pulled back into a trauma pattern, and therefore bring more compassion. So the more awareness you have of the aspect of yourself, the more you can recognize it right away, bring in the self-compassion, bring in the tapping, bring in like, what do I need right now? Maybe I need to ground. I'm going to lay on the floor and tap. I'm going to resource myself. So, the increased awareness is always, I think, the best thing that you can take away from tapping.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny too, because the mind, I find that the mind my mind has wanted to, intellectualize something and understand it on this rational level or basis. And it seems like my mind almost wants to say, well, tapping's dumb. It's like stupid, like why we, but then there's this other world of like the physicality, our physiology. And I think that the physical sort of gesture you're making of just tapping in these different areas of your body, it almost kind of awakens something up in your system.
Yeah.
And that's a different awareness than like a rational sense of something. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I got into tapping because I wanted to know the science behind it. I wanted to know why and how it worked. So there's a bridge there, and I think that's totally understandable for people. Some people are fine, like, I tell them to tap on their face and there's no problem. Other people are like, you want me to do what? And then I explain, yeah, well, what we're doing is actually tapping and stimulating meridian points. So these energy points in our body, same as if you're going to the acupuncturist, right? And they're putting needles, we're just using our fingertips, and we're using them on spots that stimulate the amygdala, which is the part of our brain that signals the fight or flight response. So we are actually stimulating the alarm system of our brain, telling us that we're not safe, that something's wrong, that we should run, and calming it down so that it switches it into a mode of you're okay, you're calm, you're safe, everything's all right. So there's a lot of science behind it, that it was working with the brain body connection, and that's why it's so incredibly good for trauma. It works for any upsetting emotion that wants to hijack you, because you're sending the signal saying, even though I have this emotion, I'm okay. Even though I'm like so enraged right now, or even though I'm so sad,
Mhm.
My body is fine. I'm all right. And so it was basically rewiring the response you have to fear or anger or to a certain stimulus. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, yeah.
To where now you can look at something that may have triggered you before, and you don't even have that response anymore. You're like, oh, I'm looking at this, let's say a dog. You can tap on a dog bite where you had a dog bite, and now you look at every dog out there as a threat. You're scared of every dog. Like I had a postman, for example, who couldn't
Mm.
even look at Tucker, who's the cutest dog in the world.
Oh,
And my brain goes to, God, I want to do some tapping with you because we could totally work on that. But yeah, you tap, and then all of a sudden you're fine. The dogs don't bother you anymore.
so the tapping is not, it's not random. It's not like you're tapping anywhere. You're
No,
actually
yeah,
tapping on
very
acupressure
specific. Yeah,
points.
very
Yeah.
specific acupressure points.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm glad you clarified that, because I think, um, I mean, it's like reading a book by its cover. We have it quick to see something for what it is based on what we think it might be. And it's, there's a lot to this technique.
Mm-hmm.
And it's nice to extrapolate and understand a little bit more about what goes into it.
Yeah, I get it. You want some science? I did too.
Yeah, let's bring some science to it, because
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the modalities that are really fun to play in are, there's an art to the way we interpret and bring our own self to it. But then, um, yeah, I mean, there's a very scientific, real sense of things having proofs and having evidence. And
Yeah, it's becoming so widespread and studied. It's now an evidence-based technique that's being used by the American Psychological Association. So therapists, doctors, people in the helping profession are bringing in EFT to their practice to help their patients with emotional regulation.
it's awesome.
Yeah.
Is there any other crossover with EFT, or do you, at this point in your life, do you find yourself being interested in other areas, or how do you see
Yeah.
EFT sort of expanding? Is it
Mm-hmm.
relatively new?
Yeah, it started to become developed from another technique called thought field therapy back in the 70s.
Mm,
And where it became kind of just boiled down into these points on the face, into a technique that everyone can use, and you don't have to engineer it like you did before. So it's becoming more accessible. But I'd say it's really the last 10 years that it's kind of gotten in the mainstream.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And projected, I mean, it's sort of hard to say what's going to happen in the future, but do you find
Yeah.
yourself moving into, bringing it into new areas of coaching and
Yeah, coaching and group work is really my passion. I've been leading groups and workshops for the past 7 years, 7 years, something like that.
long time?
Yeah, and I think it's because it's also an energy technique that when I do it in groups with people, I feel an elevation of energy, and almost its own, like, becomes its own thing. And I want to keep doing that. And I also want to keep facilitating groups with incorporating other type of energy work and things that can elevate people's consciousness and connect them to themselves and to Mother Earth.
Very
So,
cool. I
yeah,
love it.
so I got some work to do.
Yeah. After all the work you've been doing
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. The only few things that stand out to me, like that I want to mention, are that, to be able to especially redirect your present sort of unsettled sense of self, or whatever's triggering you at the moment, into a place, especially from a young age, where we form so much of our patterning from ages 0 to 7.
Yeah.
And to go back and then experience, like for me, like experiencing this like 6-year-old self who's like smarter than me, like it's like got this
Mm-hmm.
wisdom, listening to him, and then kind of having this exchange of like dialogue between that part of myself and then who I am now,
Yeah.
and seeing how wise that person, or that little one is.
Right.
that to me, yeah, I mean, to me, that's an inner child integration.
Mhm.
You're pulling in that, um, the inner child that lives in you. And I think the more child work that we do with ourselves, the more playful we become,
Definitely.
as adults.
Yep. The
And
more
that's so
connected you are
important.
to yourself, and also the more, I think, power that you have access to from yourself as well, because you're caring for the 6-year-old. You're making decisions as an adult for him, and you're seeing what you're capable of. You're seeing how you're capable of repatterning yourself and making a new belief for yourself. So it's really cool on all levels.
It is.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Well, I really appreciate you sharing all that you did today.
Yeah, thanks for
And
asking all the great questions.
yeah, I appreciate it. Is there anything else you want to mention to the audience about maybe,
Mm.
feel free to share about how people might be in touch with you. Of course, people can reach out on the website and find you there.
Yeah. Yeah. And, don't be shy about trying EFT or reaching out to me at any time and asking me any questions about EFT or how you might apply it to your life. Like one of my purposes is to just be of assistance in any way I can. So, yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, great. Well, we'll leave some information about how to get in touch with you on some links on the podcast, and we will talk another time. I look forward to our next chat. It's
Me
always fun,
too.
Lyndsie.
Thanks, Keenan.
All right, have a nice one.
You too.